All right, so we have several different types of stick electrodes. These are stick electrodes, is what they're commonly called as. The process is called shielded metal arc welding, and that's because there's a powdered baked onto the outside of these electrodes, and as you arc weld, this powder will evaporate and create a shield over the puddle. So in TIG welding and MIG welding, we have an external shielding gas. In stick welding, the external shielding gas is created when we burn off this flux. The several different types of electrodes we have all range. They have 70-18, 70-24, 70-14, 70-10, 60-10, 60-11, we got 60-13, and I think we have 70-16. We also have one special rod in here. It's a nickel chromium rod. So these electrodes are all used for different applications. The main thing you need to know of is that when we see an electrode, that we look at those 4 digits. We look at the diameter of the electrode. We look at the coating and the color of the electrode. Some brands, 60-10 is white. Some brands, 60-10 is gray or even red or blue. But what we really know is that both 60-10s will say 60-10 on the end of the electrode. This 70-18 is a large diameter 70-18. It still says 70-18 on the back. This one right here is a tiny 70-18. It's white, but the end still says 70-18. All right? So you want to make sure you grab the right electrode for the right assignment, and then you also adjust your amperage accordingly. Now, a good rule of thumb is that if you find an electrode, the diameter, and you take that diameter as a decimal. So let's say we're talking 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is 0.125 as a decimal, and that means that I'd put my amperage about 125. If I was welding with something like 3/32, which is about 0.93, somewhere around 90, 93 amps would be a good starting point. There are a list, I'll post those right now. There's a list out there for manufacturers' specifications, kind of what they would recommend. So it's a general guideline. It doesn't always work. Running 60-10 at 125 versus 70-18 at 125, you're going to get drastically different results, especially if you're welding on different thicknesses of material. And so we want to make sure that we try and set our machine up appropriately. Now, when we're welding on this 3/16 material, which we have an abundance of here at the shop, our 70-18, while it will still run at 125 and you'll be able to lay a pretty decent bead, it will be very hot. The amperage is a little high for that thickness. I would recommend going down to maybe like 115 instead of 125. And then we'll go from there. We'll see how your travel speed is and how your arc length is, your work angle, and then we will adjust your amperage accordingly. Now when we weld 60-10, 60-10 is a much more aggressive electrode, and when we're going to weld a butt joint with 60-10, we want to go no more than about 90 amps. We'll actually mess around with your amperage quite a bit with 60-10. At the max end, 90, but maybe we'll go all the way down to like 75, depending on your welding ability and also your electrode control. So when we weld with these stick electrodes, they're all going to be a little bit different. The characteristics, how they burn, some burn very aggressively and lots of spatter. Some burn a little bit smoother, a little less spatter. All of them produce a fair amount of smoke. All right, so it's one of those things that we're going to get used to as we run 70-18 and 60-10 in our class. There are loads of other electrodes, but those are the assignments that we'll focus on as a first-year student. One of the main tips I have for you when you start stick welding is this is your electrode, right? And actually, this melts and becomes your weld bead. And when I weld, I want to maintain the close arc. Just like we did in TIG welding and MIG welding, we don't want to get too far away. We got to maintain a close, tight arc. And that arc length, as this metal starts to melt, will get further and further away unless I keep feeding it in, right? So as this rod gets consumed into the weld, I need to keep pushing down on the weld and keeping the electrode nice and close to the metal. So one of my tips that I have is, instead of trying to worry about dragging it across the plate and pushing in it at the same time, I simply just have you tilt your electrode the distance of your plate. So let's say this is our plate that we're going to weld on. My beginning is up here. The end of my electrode is kind of in line with the end of the plate. I'll strike my arc, and then I push straight down. And as I push straight down, you'll notice that I've moved all the way across the plate. And by the end of the plate, I've hit the numbers. And that's theoretically about how much weld metal you're going to get out of an electrode. Is from the tip to the numbers is a good use of it. Anywhere in between, it is still a good electrode to use on other welds. So again, I'll just angle my electrode to the end of the plate, and this is about 6 inches. And so that's about the angle we want. We strike the arc, get it lit, and then as it melts, we just keep pushing down, feeding, feeding, all the way until the end. And we don't have to worry about moving our arms so much as just holding it steady and pushing straight down into the plate. All right? All right, now on to identifying these electrodes. What do these numbers mean? We'll go into depth on what those numbers mean in a video separate from this. I just wanted you to be able to identify the differences. That all the details matter. So the shape, the diameter, the color, the different types of numbers on there, those are different electrodes. They're going to burn differently. So you want to make sure you pick the correct electrode for the correct assignment. And I want you to be able to identify what those numbers are, where they're located at the end, and then maybe the amperage to also set them on.